Hey there, literature lovers, Luna Lane here, and today we're diving into one of the most chilling and prophetic novels ever written, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. This isn't just a story about book burning. It's a powerful warning about what happens when a society chooses comfort over knowledge, entertainment over truth, and conformity over critical thinking. Written in 1953, during the height of McCarthyism and the Cold War, Bradbury created a dystopian future that feels unnervingly familiar today. We live in an age of information overload, social media echo chambers, and heated debates about what should and shouldn't be taught in schools. Bradbury's vision of a world where books are banned and critical thinking is discouraged might seem extreme, but as we'll discover, the path to that world is paved with choices that feel surprisingly reasonable in the moment. Today we'll explore not just what happens in this gripping story, but the deeper questions it raises about freedom, knowledge, and what it truly means to be human. By the end of our journey, you'll understand why this slim novel continues to spark passionate debates about censorship, technology, and the power of literature to change lives. Let's set the scene. It's sometime in the near future, and we're in a world where firemen don't put out fires, they start them. Their job is to burn books, which have been outlawed because they make people unhappy by presenting conflicting ideas and complex truths. This society has chosen happiness over knowledge, ease over challenge, and unanimous agreement over difficult discussions. Guy Montag is our protagonist, a fireman who takes pride in his work burning books. He's been doing this job for 10 years without question, living in a world of wall-sized television screens, high-speed cars, and constant entertainment. His wife Mildred spends her days absorbed in interactive television shows, calling the characters her family, and popping pills to cope with her vague sense of emptiness. Everything changes when Montag meets Clarisse, a 17-year-old girl who asks him a simple question: "Are you happy?" Clarisse is different from everyone else in this world. She notices things like dew on the grass, she talks to her family, and she actually thinks about the world around her. She represents everything this society is trying to eliminate: curiosity, wonder, and independent thought. Captain Beatty is Montag's boss, a well-read and intelligent man, who understands exactly what books contain and why they're dangerous to his orderly world. Beatty becomes Montag's philosophical opponent, representing the articulate defense of censorship and conformity. Professor Faber is a former English teacher who went into hiding when books were banned. He represents the knowledge and wisdom that society has rejected, but he's also a coward who chose safety over resistance until Montag forces him to act. Granger leads a group of intellectual outcasts who have each memorized entire books to preserve them for future generations. He represents hope and the possibility of rebuilding a better world from the ashes of the old one. The mechanical hound is a robotic creature used by the fire department to track down book readers. It's programmed to hunt and kill, representing the cold, inhuman enforcement of the state's will. Our story begins with Montag returning home from a book burning, feeling satisfied with his work. But when he meets Clarisse on his walk home, her innocent questions begin to crack his certainty. She asks him if he's happy, if he ever reads the books he burns, and whether he knows why he does his job. These simple questions plant seeds of doubt that will grow throughout the story. Montag's world begins to crumble when he comes home to find his wife Mildred unconscious from a sleeping pill overdose. The casual, routine way the emergency technicians treat her suicide attempt reveals how common such despair has become in this supposedly happy society. This incident, combined with his growing friendship with Clarisse, makes Montag begin to question everything he's believed. The turning point comes when Montag responds to an alarm at an old woman's house. When they arrive to burn her books, the woman refuses to leave. Instead, she lights the match herself, choosing to die with her books rather than live without them. This act of sacrifice shocks Montag to his core. What could be in these books that someone would die for them? Montag begins secretly collecting books from the fires, hiding them in his house. When Clarisse disappears, killed in a car accident that may not have been accidental, Montag feels urgently compelled to understand what she saw in the world that he was missing. Captain Beatty visits Montag when he calls in sick, delivering a long lecture about why books were banned. According to Beatty, It wasn't government censorship that destroyed books, it was popular demand. As society became more diverse, people complained about books that offended them. As life got faster and more competitive, people wanted shorter, simpler entertainment. Eventually, books became so watered down and harmless that they were essentially meaningless, and the final step of banning them entirely seemed logical. Montag seeks out Professor Faber, hoping to understand what books really contain. Faber explains that books themselves aren't magical, it's the quality of information they contain, the leisure time to think about that information, and the right to act on what we learn that matters. These three elements, quality information, time to think, and freedom to act, are exactly what Montag's society has eliminated. The crisis escalates when Mildred's friends visit to watch television. Montag, desperate to make them understand what they're missing, reads them a poem. Their horrified, tearful reaction confirms Beatty's warnings about how books disturb people's peace of mind. Mildred is so angry and frightened that she turns in the fire alarm on her own husband. When Montag arrives at his own house to burn his books, Beatty forces him to do the job himself. But when Beatty threatens to track down Faber, Montag snaps and kills his captain with the flamethrower. Now he's a fugitive, hunted by the mechanical hound, and broadcast on live television as the enemy of society. Montag escapes to the wilderness, where he finds Granger and his group of book people. Each person has memorized entire works of literature, becoming living books to preserve knowledge for future generations. As they watch the city destroy itself in a nuclear war, Granger speaks of the phoenix, the mythical bird that burns itself and rises from its own ashes. Perhaps, he suggests, humanity can learn from this cycle and build something better from the ruins. Now let's explore the powerful themes that make this novel so enduring and relevant. Censorship is the most obvious theme, but Bradbury presents it in a complex way. The books in this society weren't banned by an authoritarian government. They were eliminated because people chose comfort over challenge. Different groups complained about books that offended them, and gradually, anything that might upset anyone was removed. This suggests that censorship can emerge from popular demand rather than government oppression, making it much more insidious and harder to resist. The conflict between knowledge and ignorance drives the entire story. Montag's society has chosen ignorance because knowledge brings uncertainty, disagreement, and unhappiness. People prefer the simple pleasures of television and mindless entertainment to the complex challenges of reading and thinking. But Bradbury shows us that this choice leads to spiritual emptiness and ultimately to self-destruction. Technology versus nature appears throughout the novel. Technology in Montag's world is used to isolate people from each other and from the natural world. Television walls replace human conversation. Cars travel so fast that people can't appreciate the landscape, and mechanical devices replace authentic experiences. Clarisse represents connection to nature. She notices rain, enjoys walking, and values face-to-face conversation. Conformity versus individuality is explored through every character. Montag's society demands absolute conformity. Everyone must think the same thoughts, enjoy the same entertainment, and accept the same limited worldview. Individuals like Clarisse, who think differently, are eliminated. The book people represent the ultimate rejection of conformity, choosing to preserve individual works of literature even at great personal cost. The power of literature and language permeates the story. Bradbury shows us that books aren't just collections of information, they're repositories of human experience, wisdom, and creativity. When Montag reads poetry to Mildred's friends, their emotional reaction proves that literature still has the power to move people, which is exactly why it's been banned. Let's examine the rich symbolism that adds deeper layers to the story. Fire is the central symbol, representing both destruction and rebirth. At the beginning, fire is purely destructive. It burns books and destroys knowledge. But by the end, Granger's discussion of the phoenix suggests that fire can also be creative, clearing away the old to make room for something new. Mirrors appear throughout the story, representing self-reflection and truth. Clarisse tells Montag he's like a mirror, reflecting things as they really are. Montag notices that firemen avoid looking at themselves in mirrors, suggesting their unwillingness to confront the truth about their actions. The mechanical hound symbolizes the dehumanizing effects of technology, when it's used for oppression. It has no emotions, no conscience, and no capacity for mercy, representing how society has replaced human judgment with mechanical enforcement. Birds, particularly the phoenix, represent hope and renewal. The phoenix burns itself to death but rises reborn from its ashes, suggesting that even after complete destruction, there's potential for renewal and growth. The river that Montag crosses during his escape represents a boundary between his old life and new understanding. Rivers often symbolize change and transformation in literature, and Montag emerges from the water as a different person. Now let's tackle some critical thinking questions, and I'll share my perspective while encouraging you to form your own opinions. Did Montag's society choose this path willingly, or was it imposed on them? This is one of the most important questions the novel raises. Captain Beatty argues that people demanded simpler, less challenging entertainment, and that books gradually disappeared because no one wanted them anymore. He suggests that the government simply responded to popular will. My opinion is that Bradbury is showing us how easily freedom can be surrendered in the name of comfort and avoiding offense. The society didn't wake up one day and decide to ban books. They made a series of small compromises that eventually led to total censorship. This makes the dystopia more frightening, because it suggests we might be making similar choices today without realizing it. However, you might argue that government and corporations manipulated public opinion to create this demand, making the people victims rather than willing participants. Is Captain Beatty ultimately sympathetic or villainous? Beatty is one of literature's most complex antagonists. He's clearly intelligent and well-read, and he seems to genuinely believe that he's protecting society from the chaos that books create. His argument that books cause more harm than good by making people unhappy and creating social divisions has some merit. In my view, Beatty represents the intellectual who becomes complicit in oppression, because he convinces himself it's for the greater good. He's tragic because he understands what's been lost, but has chosen to become the instrument of that loss. His anger at Montag seems to stem partly from jealousy. Montag has the courage to seek what Beatty has convinced himself to abandon. But you might see Beatty as purely evil, using his intelligence to justify oppression, or as genuinely heroic for maintaining social stability. Are the book people preserving knowledge, or just hoarding it? Granger's group has memorized entire books to preserve them for future generations, but they're not actively trying to spread this knowledge or change society. Some critics argue that they're just as elitist as the firemen, keeping knowledge to themselves rather than sharing it. I think Bradbury presents them as humanity's insurance policy. They're preserving knowledge until society is ready to receive it again. They understand that trying to force books on people who don't want them would be futile and dangerous. Their plan to wait for society to collapse and then help rebuild it seems wise rather than cowardly. However, you might argue that they have a moral obligation to actively resist the system rather than passively waiting for it to fail. How relevant is this story to our current relationship with technology and information? This might be the most important question for contemporary readers. We live in an age of information overload, social media echo chambers, and increasing polarization. People often choose entertainment over challenging content, and there's growing pressure to remove books from schools and libraries. My opinion is that Bradbury's warnings are more relevant than ever. We see people voluntarily isolating themselves in media bubbles, choosing sources that confirm their existing beliefs rather than challenge them. The speed of modern life leaves little time for deep reading and reflection. Social media provides the same kind of instant gratification that Mildred's television walls offered. However, you might argue that technology has actually democratized information and given more people access to knowledge than ever before. Is happiness a worthy goal if it requires giving up freedom and knowledge? This is the central philosophical question of the novel. Montag's society has achieved a kind of happiness by eliminating sources of conflict and confusion, but at the cost of everything that makes life meaningful. I believe Bradbury is arguing that authentic happiness can only come from engagement with the full complexity of human experience, including suffering and uncertainty. The happiness in Montag's society is shallow and artificial, which is why so many people like Mildred resort to suicide attempts. True happiness requires the freedom to think, question, and grow, even if that process is sometimes painful. But you might argue that if people are genuinely content with simple pleasures, there's nothing wrong with choosing comfort over complexity. What role does education play in preventing dystopia? The novel suggests that critical thinking skills are essential for maintaining freedom. The people in Montag's society never learned to question what they were told, or to think independently about complex issues. In my view, education must teach people not just facts but how to evaluate information, consider multiple perspectives, and think critically about what they read and hear. The goal should be to create citizens who can resist manipulation and think for themselves. This is why attempts to limit what can be taught in schools are so dangerous. They undermine the critical thinking skills that democracy requires. However, you might argue that education should focus on practical skills and widely accepted values, rather than encouraging students to question everything. The relevance of Fahrenheit 451 inches to our contemporary world is striking and somewhat unsettling. We see echoes of Montag's society and our own relationship with technology and information. Consider how social media algorithms create echo chambers that reinforce our existing beliefs while filtering out challenging viewpoints. Like Mildred's wall-sized televisions, our devices provide constant entertainment and distraction from serious thought and reflection. The speed of modern life leaves little time for the kind of deep reading and contemplation that books require. Many people prefer quick social media posts and video content to longer, more complex texts. This isn't necessarily bad, but it does represent a shift away from the sustained attention that literature demands. We also see ongoing debates about what books should be available in schools and libraries, with various groups seeking to remove texts they find offensive or inappropriate. While these efforts come from legitimate concerns about protecting children, they echo the gradual narrowing of available literature that Beatty describes. The phenomenon of fake news and information manipulation shows how easily people can be convinced to distrust reliable sources of information. When people lose faith in traditional journalism and scholarship, they become vulnerable to propaganda and misinformation. However, there are also significant differences between our world and Montag's. We have unprecedented access to information through the internet, and many people actively seek out diverse perspectives and challenging content. Digital technology has also made it easier to preserve and share books, making total censorship much more difficult. Bradbury uses several powerful literary techniques to create his dystopian vision and emotional impact. The novel is structured as a transformation story, following Montag's journey from unconscious conformity to awakened rebellion. Each section shows a different stage of his development. His initial satisfaction with his role, his growing doubt and questioning, and finally his complete rejection of his former life. Symbolism and imagery work together to create a coherent vision of this future world. The constant presence of fire connects destruction and renewal, while images of darkness and light reflect Montag's journey from ignorance to understanding. Bradbury's prose style varies dramatically depending on the content. When describing the mindless entertainment of Montag's world, the language becomes fast-paced and fragmented. When Faber or Granger speak about books and knowledge, the language becomes more thoughtful and poetic. The use of literary allusions adds depth and irony to the story. When Montag reads Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach to Mildred's friends, the poem's themes of loss of faith and meaning directly comment on their society's spiritual emptiness. Bradbury also employs dramatic irony throughout, allowing readers to understand things that the characters miss. We see the emptiness and despair in Montag's society, even when the characters claim to be happy. Fahrenheit 451 inches remains one of the most important warnings about the fragility of intellectual freedom. Bradbury shows us that the greatest threats to knowledge and critical thinking often come not from obvious oppression, but from our own choices to prioritize comfort over challenge. The novel teaches us that preserving freedom requires active effort and vigilance. We can't simply assume that the right to read, think, and speak freely will always exist. These rights must be constantly defended and exercised. Most importantly, Bradbury reminds us of the transformative power of literature and learning. Books aren't just entertainment or information storage. They're conversations with the greatest minds in human history, invitations to see the world through different eyes, and challenges to grow beyond our current understanding. The questions Montag faces are questions we all must answer. What kind of society do we want to live in? Are we willing to accept the discomfort that comes with learning and growth? How do we balance the desire for harmony with the need for truth? As you think about this story, consider your own relationship with books, technology, and information. Do you seek out challenging ideas, or do you prefer content that confirms what you already believe? Do you make time for deep reading and reflection, or are you always moving from one quick distraction to the next? Remember that every generation faces the choice between comfort and growth, between easy answers and difficult questions. Bradbury's vision shows us what happens when a society consistently chooses the easy path. As we conclude our exploration of this powerful and prophetic novel, remember that the best way to honor Bradbury's warning is to remain curious, keep reading, and never stop asking questions, in a world that sometimes seems designed to discourage deep thinking. Choosing to engage with challenging literature is itself an act of resistance. The future that Bradbury feared isn't inevitable, but preventing it requires conscious effort from each of us. We must choose knowledge over ignorance, complexity over simplicity, and growth over comfort. Thanks for joining me, Luna Lane, on this journey through one of literature's most important warnings about the future of human freedom and dignity. Until next time, keep reading, keep thinking, and keep the flame of curiosity burning bright. Remember, in a world that might prefer you to stop asking questions, continuing to seek knowledge and truth is both a literary lesson and a civic duty.